Just a few decades after the death of Muhammad, the Muslim community that had once been united began to fracture. New movements appeared, the Khawarij, the Shia, and the Murji'a. But why did these groups emerge so early, and what deeper forces drove their rise? The crisis of leadership. After Muhammad's death in 632 CE, the community had to face a difficult question: who should lead? At first, leadership passed through a series of caliphs chosen by consensus or power. But by the mid-7th century, disagreements over legitimacy boiled over. The assassination of the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, in 656 CE, opened a period of civil war. His successor, Ali ibn Abi Talib, faced challenges from powerful figures like Muawiyah, governor of Syria. This was not only a struggle for political control, it was also about the very meaning of faith and authority. If you were living in this turbulent time, would you prioritize stability, or would you demand absolute justice even if it led to war? The Khawarij, meaning those who went out, emerged from Ali's own army. When Ali agreed to arbitration with Muawiyah after the Battle of Siffin in 657 CE, a faction of his supporters accused him of betraying God's will. For them, accepting human judgment was unacceptable. Their theology was simple but extreme. A Muslim who commits a major sin ceases to be a Muslim. To them, faith was inseparable from moral perfection. Anyone who failed was an enemy. This uncompromising view pushed the Khawarij into violent rebellion, not only against Ali but against any ruler they considered illegitimate. Should political compromise be seen as wisdom or as weakness? In contrast, the Shia, or supporters of Ali, held that leadership belonged within the family of Muhammad. They believed Ali and later his descendants had a unique right to guide the community. Their movement took on a tragic dimension. After the Battle of Karbala in 680 CE, Hussein, the son of Ali and grandson of Muhammad, was killed along with his companions. This event became a defining moment, transforming Shiism into a movement of resistance, sacrifice, and moral protest against injustice. For the Shia, leadership was not just political, it was sacred, rooted in a line of imams believed to possess special authority. After the tragedy of Karbala in 680 CE, the Muslim world was shaken. But while the Shia were mourning Hussein's death and turning their grief into a movement of protest, the Khawarij were taking a very different path. For them, the chaos of civil war was an opportunity to push their uncompromising vision of Islam, one where anyone who disagreed with them could be declared an unbeliever and targeted. In the decades after Karbala, the Khawarij waged a series of rebellions across Iraq, Arabia, and Persia. They refused to accept the authority of either the Umayyad rulers in Damascus or the Shia claims of leadership through the family of Muhammad. To the Khawarij, both sides had betrayed God's command. They set up their own militant communities, often small but fiercely committed, striking with sudden raids and assassinations. Their violence was shocking. They attacked caravans and villages, killing not only soldiers but also ordinary Muslims whom they judged as sinners or unbelievers. Some Khawarij factions became infamous for slaughtering women and children, arguing that anyone outside their ranks was complicit in falsehood. One of their most notorious actions was the assassination of Ali himself in 661 CE, an act that symbolized their willingness to destroy even the most respected figures of the early community. Even after Ali's death, the Khawarij remained a persistent thorn in the side of rulers. Under the Umayyads, they staged repeated uprisings, especially in Iraq. Their fighters were small in number but fearless, willing to die in battle rather than compromise. The most famous of their revolts was the uprising of Najdat ibn Amir and later of Nafi ibn al-Azraq, whose followers, the Azariqa, were the most extreme Khawarij faction, declaring all Muslims outside their group to be apostates deserving of death. These endless wars and massacres left a deep mark on Islamic memory. The Khawarij became a symbol of religious extremism, a warning of what happens when faith is fused with absolute intolerance. To their enemies, they were fanatics. To themselves, they were the only true believers, standing alone against a corrupt world. Even after the early uprisings of the Azariqa, the Najdat, and the Sufriyya, the Khawarij did not disappear. Throughout the late 7th and 8th centuries, they remained a constant source of rebellion against the Umayyads, and later the Abbasids. Their resilience came from their small, mobile bands of fighters, their fiery rhetoric, and their willingness to die rather than submit. In Iraq, Persia, and Arabia, Khawarijite groups launched raids and revolts well into the 8th century. Some factions held territory for years, but most were eventually crushed by the powerful armies of the caliphs. Their uncompromising ideology made them too rigid to form alliances, which left them isolated in the long run. In North Africa, however, Khawarijite influence lasted much longer. Among the Berber tribes of the Maghreb, their message of equality and opposition to Arab privilege found fertile ground. Khawarijite groups like the Ibadiyya emerged as a more moderate branch, rejecting violence, but keeping the old principle that leadership should belong to the most righteous, not to a dynasty. The Ibadis survived, while the more extreme factions burned themselves out in blood. By the 9th and 10th centuries, most of the militant Khawarijite sects had been wiped out. The Abbasids and local dynasties crushed their revolts one by one. The Azariqa vanished, the Najdat disappeared, and the Sufriyya faded into history. Only the Ibadis endured, surviving in places like Oman and parts of North Africa to this day, but stripped of the violent extremism that had defined the early Khawarij. In the end, the Khawarij lived and died by their own ideals. Their demand for absolute purity and their refusal to compromise gave them strength in the short term, but it doomed them in the long term. Their story became a lasting warning in Islamic history. When faith is turned into uncompromising violence, it may burn bright, but it cannot last. Do you think the Khawarij were destroyed mainly by military power or by the rigidity of their own ideas?